The crystal vase on the hallway table rattled as Janelle steadied herself, trying not to drop her cleaning caddy. She'd barely shifted her weight when a voice knifed down from the marble staircase. "What do you think you're doing up here?" Dr. Patricia Thornwood descended one sharp step at a time, white coat swinging, eyes sweeping over Janelle's uniform and stopping with disdain. "Mr. Whitmore asked me to," Janelle began. "I don't care what he asked," Thornwood snapped. "Real professionals are working with his son today. People with degrees. You are here to clean, not wander around pretending you belong." Heat climbed Janelle's neck, but she swallowed it. "Yes, ma'am. Use the service stairs," Thornwood added. "And stay in the kitchen where you're needed." Janelle turned away, the old message echoing again. Know your place. No one in that house, not Thornwood, not the specialists, not even billionaire Richard Whitmore, knew that in days, the maid they dismissed would be the only person able to reach his unreachable son. Hours later, the second-floor hallway was quiet. Mr. Whitmore himself had told her earlier, "Please tidy around Dylan's room. Ignore whatever Patricia said." So she worked silently, wiping frames and baseboards. The therapy room door opened. 3 specialists stepped out, deflated. "No response again," one muttered. "No sign recognition," another said. "No eye contact." Thornwood led them away. "Some children simply cannot be reached," she declared. They passed Janelle without noticing her. She set down the frame she was holding, heart tightening at the words. She'd heard people say similar things about her deaf daughter for years. Then she noticed a small movement near the wall. Dylan, 7 years old, knees tucked to his chest, eyes down. Most would see a boy lost in himself. But his hands were moving. Right fingers tapped his throat. Both hands flowed downward. Then he pointed at the floor. Throat. Flow. Point. Again. Frustrated. Janelle followed his gesture. A water bottle lay just out of reach. Her breath caught. She'd spent years watching her daughter invent signs before learning formal ones. She knew this wasn't random movement. Slowly, she set down her spray bottle and lowered herself to the carpet a few feet away. No sudden moves. No voice. She lifted her hand and copied him exactly. Tap at the throat, flowing motion, glance toward the bottle. His hand stopped. He looked at her, really looked. Gently, she slid the bottle toward him. She didn't touch him or urge him. She simply answered what he'd been asking. Dylan grabbed it, opened it, and drank deeply. When he finished, he pressed his palm to his chest and opened his fingers like a blooming flower. "A thank you." Janelle's throat tightened. She had taught that gesture to her daughter years ago. Footsteps echoed. She looked up. Richard Whitmore stood frozen at the end of the hall, briefcase dangling from his hand, staring at the scene like he'd witnessed something impossible. He approached slowly, eyes moving between his son and the maid kneeling beside him. His voice cracked. "What did you just do?" To understand why Janelle could decode a silent child's hands in seconds, you have to go back 11 years, before the uniform, before the mop, before the world stopped seeing her. She'd once stood in a college linguistics lab, presenting research that made her professor lean back and say, "This is PhD-level thinking, Janelle. You could change the field." She walked out of that meeting with hope glowing in her chest. Then her phone rang. Her husband had collapsed. A sudden hemorrhage. Gone before she reached the hospital. The funeral drained their savings. The eviction notice came 2 weeks later. Her daughter, Elena, just 14 months old and deaf, needed care she could no longer afford. Dreams didn't simply die, they were traded for survival. So she scrubbed houses. Wealthy people glanced past her. She was no longer Janelle the scholar, just the maid who works fast. But each night, after Elena slept, she opened library books and watched free ASL videos, determined to speak her daughter's world. Her academic future was gone, but her mind wasn't. She learned to see meaning in movements, small, overlooked signals most people never noticed. Which is why, when Richard ushered her into his leather-in-glass study after the hallway incident, she felt like 2 versions of herself collided, the scholar she used to be and the maid she had become. He paced once, then said, "Mrs. Morrison, he looked at you." He communicated. "Explain." Janelle's fingers tightened together. "Sir, Dylan wasn't acting out. He was signing his own system. When deaf children aren't given full language early, they create one. Home sign. Consistent. Real." Richard stared as if she'd spoken a foreign language. "And you recognized it? How?" My daughter, she answered softly. I couldn't afford specialists. So I taught myself. Books, videos, community classes, 12 years of learning because I didn't want her growing up unheard. The room went still. You're telling me, Richard said slowly, that while a team of experts can't reach my son, you, self-taught, can? No, she said. I'm saying I understand what he's doing. If we learn his language first, he might let us teach him ours. He sank into his chair, rubbing his forehead. Patricia will hate this. I know. But results matter more than pride, he murmured. Then he opened a drawer and pushed a worn leather journal toward her. My late wife wrote everything she observed about Dylan before she passed. Maybe this helps. Janelle touched the journal gently, almost reverently. And if I'm wrong, she whispered. Then nothing changes, he said. But if you're right, my son gets a voice. The next morning, Janelle sat on the playroom floor, 10 feet from Dylan, silently documenting every movement. Thornwood stood by the door, arms crossed, disapproving enough to wilt flowers. Dylan built a block tower. It toppled. His hands shot up, palms rising then dropping sharply. A pattern. A sign. Janelle scribbled, gesture for broken or lost. She didn't intervene, didn't force eye contact. She simply watched. For 90 minutes. By Wednesday, she'd identified over 20 distinct signs. That afternoon, Mrs. Henderson brought apple slices. Dylan recoiled, pushing the plate away, hands moving in frantic, repeated gestures. He's refusing again, she sighed. He's not refusing, Janelle said. He's saying the texture is wrong. Try applesauce. Thornwood scoffed. Behavioral acting out. Not language. But when applesauce was placed before him, Dylan relaxed instantly and ate. Mrs. Henderson's eyes widened. How did you? He told me, Janelle said simply. 2 days later at the hospital, Dylan panicked at the sight of a needle. The nurse reached for restraints. No, Richard said sharply. Let her try first. Janelle knelt and explained the coming pain in Dylan's own gestures. Quick hurt, then fading, then freedom. He watched, breathing slowing, and slowly extended his arm. They drew his blood without a single strap. When it was over, he tapped his chest twice, brave. The nurse whispered, In 3 years, we've never done that. And from the doorway, Thornwood watched with a tightening jaw. Days later, the long dining table became a conference room. A lineup of specialists sat across from Richard and Janelle. Thornwood led the charge. She has no credentials, she said coldly. No degree. No authority to participate in therapy. This is irresponsible. Janelle spoke calmly, meeting each expert's eye. His signs aren't random. They have structure. When we validate his language, he communicates more. That's not a coincidence. It's linguistics. Richard leaned forward. If you can match her results, do it. If not, she stays. Thornwood stiffened. Then I resign. She gathered her papers and strode out. No one followed. The maid had just outperformed the experts. And the real fight had only begun. 6 weeks after Janelle first recognized Dylan's language, the Whitmore estate felt like a different house. Where silence once hung heavy, small bursts of communication now filled the day. Gestures, choices, even preferences. His world was opening. At breakfast one morning, Dylan walked to the pantry, tapped his chest, made a curling motion with his hand, then pointed upward. Janelle recognized it instantly. Honey cereal, 3rd shelf. Mrs. Henderson blinked. You want that one? She asked. Dylan nodded eagerly. Moments later, he signed thank you, both in his home style and the ASL version Janelle taught him. The maid who'd once been told to stay in the kitchen now trained the staff to understand the boy everyone else thought unreachable. Her notebook bulged with data, charts, sign lists, notes on triggers, progress logs. It wasn't messy guesswork. It was research, structured, consistent, scientific, and the results spoke louder than anyone's credentials. Communication attempts per day climbed from a rare handful to dozens. Meltdowns dropped. Eye contact, once non-existent, now appeared naturally when Dylan felt safe. He wasn't being fixed. He was being heard. His first trip to the park in 8 months was a turning point. The swings were full, and the Dylan of old would have spiraled into frustration. But this Dylan signed to Janelle, wait plus turn. You want to wait for your turn? She confirmed. He nodded, eyes fixed on the swings. When a boy hopped off a seat and stared at Dylan curiously, Dylan watched his gestures, then responded with his own. My turn, 5 pushes, then you. The boy didn't understand the signs exactly, but he understood the meaning. He stepped aside. As Dylan swung through the air, hair flying, face glowing, Janelle wiped tears from her cheeks. Not because he was swinging, because he had negotiated, communicated, existed in the world instead of shrinking from it. $500,000 of therapy had never delivered that moment. Respect had. That afternoon, Karen Foster from the school district arrived with a folder clutched tightly in her hands. "I have news," she said in Richard's study. "Good news and complicated news." Richard straightened. "Go on." The district reviewed Dylan's progress. "They're willing to offer him a spot in our mainstream deaf education program next semester." Janelle gasped. "He'd be with other deaf kids?" "Yes. With interpreters, small classes, the full program." Richard exhaled, relief shuddering out of him. But Karen hesitated. "However, the program is ASL only. They are not equipped to support Dylan's home sign. Teachers may dismiss his gestures. And district policy won't allow Mrs. Morrison to accompany him. Only certified specialists or teachers may serve as in-class supports." A cold weight settled on Janelle's chest. Months of progress, trust, understanding, risked being unraveled by a system not built for children like him. "So he's ready for school," Richard said slowly. "But school isn't ready for him." "That's accurate," Karen admitted. Janelle stared at her notebook. The work she'd done mattered. But in the eyes of the system, she was still just the maid. "Unless," Karen added softly, "Mrs. Morrison earns credentials. Enough to qualify as a communication specialist. Then she could legally support Dylan. And others." Janelle almost laughed. "I have a daughter. Bills. A full-time job. Going back to school isn't realistic." Richard didn't respond immediately. But something shifted behind his eyes. A determination she'd seen only once before. The day he said he'd fight anyone who stood between his son and progress. 2 evenings later, he summoned Janelle to his corporate office. She arrived in her uniform, feeling too small for the glass and steel world around her. "I've been making calls," he said, handing her a tablet. On it, an email from Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a respected linguistics chair. "This documentation," the email read, "is exceptional. Analytical depth, observational rigor. This is graduate-level work." "Who is the researcher?" Janelle's hands trembled. "She thinks I'm qualified," she whispered. "She knows you are," Richard corrected. "She wants to sponsor your academic enrollment. Our foundation will fund the entire program. Your work with Dylan becomes your practicum. You'll become credentialed and able to follow him into school." I can't take this," she stammered. "It's too much." "It's not charity," Richard said quietly. "It's investment. You gave my son a voice. Let us give you back the future you set aside." Janelle swallowed hard. "I need to talk to Elena." When she explained everything that night, tuition, classes, long hours, her daughter signed simply. "Mom, you finally get to be who you were meant to be. Say yes." And for the first time in years, Janelle allowed herself to believe she was meant for something more. By the time Dylan's 8th birthday approached, Janelle's days had taken on a new rhythm. Mornings with Dylan, afternoons documenting his progress, evenings studying for her new academic program. Her world was fuller than ever, yet she felt lighter than she had in years. One evening, while she wiped down the kitchen counters, Richard appeared in the doorway, hesitant, uncharacteristically unsure. "Janelle, I need your help," he said. She turned, confused. "With what?" He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "His birthday is Saturday. The first one since my wife passed. Last year he couldn't communicate what he wanted. This year he can, but I'm afraid to ask. Afraid I'll get it wrong." Janelle smiled gently. "Then let's ask him together." Dylan's room was dimly lit, warm, peaceful. He looked up as they entered, surprised to see his father at bedtime. Janelle demonstrated slowly. "What, want, birthday?" in clear ASL, then repeated using Dylan's home signs. Richard copied her movements, stiff but determined. "What, want, birthday?" he managed. Dylan stilled, eyes widening. His father was speaking his language. His hands lifted. He pointed to a wall poster, an aquarium scene filled with bright fish. Then he made the movement for swimming, followed by his sign for water, then pointed to Richard, then himself. "He wants to go to the aquarium," Janelle whispered. "With you." Richard lowered onto the bed, voice shaking. Just that. Not gifts. Not parties. Just time. With trembling hands, and Janelle signing beside him, Richard shaped the signs. Yes. You and me. Promise. Dylan smiled so wide it lit the entire room. He wrapped his arms around his father's waist. Richard froze, overwhelmed, then held his son tightly, tears sliding down his face as Dylan whispered his thanks in gestures only Janelle fully understood. In the hallway afterward, Richard's voice cracked. You taught me to talk to my son. No, Janelle corrected softly. You wanted to hear him. That's what made the difference. But there was no time for celebration. The school district scheduled Dylan's formal evaluation. 3 experts, 1 session, 1 decision that would determine his entire future. He'd either be allowed into the mainstream deaf program or be redirected to a restrictive facility labeled for severe communication disorders. The morning of the evaluation, the Whitmore living room had been transformed. Clinical table, observation cameras, test materials laid out neatly. Dylan sat on the rug, playing with soft blocks, unaware of the weight in the air. The panel arrived. Dr. Thompson, calm but procedural. Susan Brennan, practical. And last, unexpectedly, Dr. Patricia Thornwood. Her return felt like a cold wind sweeping through the room. We invited her as an external consultant, Thompson explained. Given her history with Dylan, Janelle's stomach dropped. The evaluation began. Dylan, Thompson said aloud. Can you look at me? Dylan didn't respond. He didn't understand spoken directives. Thompson tried ASL. What name? Dylan stared blankly. Standard signs weren't his first language. They were still new, fragile. His breathing quickened. His hands tensed. Thornwood leaned in, voice cool and sharp. He lacks functional communication. This is consistent with my prior findings. He is not ready for mainstream education. Janelle clenched her notebook. You're evaluating him in a language he doesn't speak. Thornwood's smile was thin. We cannot modify standardized testing for convenience. Richard stepped forward. Let her interpret. Thompson hesitated. Please, he said finally. Try. Janelle moved to Dylan's side, signing slow, soothing, safe. Try. With me? He nodded faintly. Ask your questions, she said. Thompson held up a red circle. Janelle signed red. Dylan immediately pointed, signed red in his home system. Next, emotions. Dylan showed happy, sad, scared, angry. Next, sequencing. Tell us about your birthday, Janelle signed. Dylan's whole face came alive. His hands danced. His father, fish swimming, water, joy, love. Janelle interpreted every piece clearly, tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. When he ended with a gesture pointing to his heart, then toward Richard, the room fell silent. He said he felt loved, Janelle whispered. Richard covered his mouth, overwhelmed. Thompson leaned back slowly. Mrs. Morrison, this is remarkable. But Thornwood shot to her feet. This is dangerous. You are enabling a private language that isolates him. When you are gone, he will fail. ASL is the only acceptable method. Janelle faced her calmly. He's not limited to one language. He's bilingual. He now knows 43 ASL signs, and counting. Respecting a child's first language doesn't trap them. It frees them. And your credentials? Thornwood spat. I'm earning them, Janelle replied. And I've been hired as a linguistic specialist through the Whitmore Foundation. Thornwood froze. She had no argument left. Only ego. The panel stepped aside to deliberate. 5 agonizing minutes. Finally, they returned. Trial acceptance, Thompson announced. Dylan will join the mainstream deaf program with a trained support aide. Further evaluation monthly. Janelle gasped. Richard closed his eyes in relief. Dylan ran to her, signing thank you, then forming a new sign, hands shaping a small circle over his heart. What's that? She whispered. Dylan signed again, more clearly. Friend. Janelle's breath stopped. Her eyes filled. The maid who once wasn't allowed near him had become the one person he trusted most. The weeks after Dylan's acceptance into the mainstream deaf program felt unreal. The house seemed brighter. Dylan woke eager, signing more each day, confident enough now to initiate conversations. Janelle documented everything. His grammar patterns, new ASL acquisition, emotional regulation progress. Her notebook had become a bridge between worlds. Meanwhile, Janelle balanced 2 lives. By day, Dylan's communication specialist. By night, Georgetown graduate student, reading dense linguistic theory while Elena did homework beside her. Some nights Janelle fell asleep on her textbooks, pen still in hand. Elena draped a blanket over her and whispered, "You got this, Mom," before tiptoeing to bed. The work was exhausting, but it felt like destiny reclaiming her. 6 months after the evaluation, Janelle stood backstage at a prestigious academic conference in D.C. Her research, once scribbled in a Maid's notebook, was now part of a landmark presentation on early language access. The auditorium buzzed with experts, educators, advocates. Dr. Rodriguez introduced her with words that left Janelle breathless. "She has shown us what happens when brilliance is ignored, until someone listens." Janelle stepped onto the stage under warm lights. A year ago, she cleaned these people's homes. Today, they rose to applaud her. She began, steady but emotional. 18 months ago, a specialist told me to stay in the service hallway. Today, I want to talk about what happens when you stop listening to the hallway and start listening to the child. Slides appeared. Charts. Video clips. Dylan's transformation. Then the audience watched a split-screen video, before and after. Left, Dylan withdrawing, unable to connect. Right, Dylan signing fluidly in ASL with classmates, laughing, negotiating, teaching. "We didn't change who he was," Janelle explained. "We learned who he already was." When the video ended, the entire room was silent, not from doubt, but awe. Then Richard joined her on stage. He spoke carefully, voice thick with gratitude. "I paid for the best specialists money could buy. None of them reached my son. One woman, someone I had nearly overlooked, gave him a voice. If you want to know what expertise looks like, look at results, not resumes." The audience rose again, louder, longer. Then came the moment that stunned everyone. Dylan walked on stage. He signed with confidence, blending ASL and the home sign gestures he still cherished. The interpreter voiced his message. "I wasn't broken. I was waiting for someone to look." People wiped tears. A standing ovation shook the hall. The next months changed everything. Janelle's work drew national attention. A Washington Post feature. An NPR interview called "The Maid Who Reinvented Deaf Education." A viral post by Richard praising her breakthrough. Talent exists everywhere. Opportunity does not. School districts began calling. She consulted for over a dozen, helping them implement early home sign validation. Children once labeled unreachable made progress similar to Dylan's. The Whitmore Foundation expanded her role and funded a pilot program, the Morrison Protocol. Within 6 months, 23 children participated. 19 showed measurable communication gains. Multiple classrooms used her training materials. Every result reaffirmed what she already knew. Children communicate when adults stop forcing them into boxes. One afternoon at Georgetown, Dr. Rodriguez invited her into the office. Papers lay neatly on the desk. "Janelle, we'd like to offer you early acceptance into our PhD program," she said, sliding the folder toward her. "Your work is changing the field. We want to give you the resources to keep going." Janelle stared, stunned. "A PhD? Me? You've already done the work," Rodriguez replied. "Now you'll have the title that matches it." And beneath the acceptance letter was another document, so unexpected it made Janelle cover her mouth. A proposal. The Morrison Center for Home Sign Research. With her as the founding director. Her hands shook. "Is this really happening?" Rodriguez smiled. "You earned it." That evening, Janelle returned home. Elena sat cross-legged on the couch, waiting. "Well," she signed eagerly. Janelle exhaled a trembling breath. "They want me to get a PhD. And they want to name a research center after me." Elena broke into the widest smile Janelle had ever seen. "You didn't become who they said you were," she signed. "You became who you always were." Janelle pulled her daughter close. The girl she once fought to communicate for was now the one celebrating her mother's voice. The world was finally listening. 5 years passed, but in the Whitmore household, and in Janelle's life, those years felt like an entire era transforming. The world had changed because one boy finally learned to speak, and one woman refused to stay unseen. The Morrison Protocol spread across the country. 47 school districts adopted it. Hundreds of educators trained in it. Children once labeled non-communicative, now signed, connected, laughed, lived. And while the world evolved, so did Janelle. She defended her dissertation in a packed Georgetown auditorium that stood to applaud before she even finished. She left that stage not as a maid-turned-scholar, but as Dr. Janelle Morrison, expert in early language emergence, director of a new center that carried her name. Yet even then, even with international invitations and accolades, she still visited Dylan weekly. Not because she was required to. Those days were long gone. But because the boy who once hid behind his hands had grown into a confident communicator who considered her more than a teacher. He considered her family. On the morning of her center's grand opening, Janelle walked through the new glass building bearing her name. The plaque at the entrance read, "The Morrison Center for Communication Innovation, empowering every voice." She paused, hand hovering above the engraved letters. This plaque was made of steel, but what it represented was carved from years of lost dreams, rebuilt futures, late nights, exhaustion, and relentless belief. Richard stepped beside her. He looked older now, but lighter, freer. "You built this," he said quietly. "You made space for me to," she replied. "No, I just stopped looking at your job title long enough to see your brilliance." Before she could respond, a familiar voice called her name, soft, young, full of joy. Dylan. Now 10 years old, tall for his age, confidently bilingual, he ran toward her. His hands moved in perfect ASL. "Are you ready?" "They're waiting." "Ready," she signed back, laughing. Behind him, Elena filmed with her phone, proud beyond words. She was 15 now, funny, smart, fiercely supportive. Janelle often wondered if she had been the reason this entire journey had been possible. When she doubted herself, Elena believed enough for both of them. The ribbon-cutting ceremony drew teachers, policymakers, parents, and children from across the state. Some brought photos showing their children before and after learning to communicate. Others hugged Janelle with tears in their eyes. A mother whispered, "My son said mom for the first time because of your method." An overwhelmed father said, "We had accepted silence. You proved it wasn't silence. It was a language we weren't listening to." Richard delivered the opening remarks, his voice steady but emotional. 5 years ago, Dr. Morrison was told to stay off the second floor of my home. Today she stands on a stage the entire country is watching. My son is thriving because one woman ignored the limits others put on her. Applause thundered. Then it was Janelle's turn. She stepped to the microphone, heart racing. Elena gave her a thumbs up from the front row. Dylan stood beside her proudly, almost protectively. Janelle began softly. "I used to clean houses for people who never learned my name. I was told I didn't belong in academic spaces. But every night, my daughter reminded me I was more than what my job said." She looked at Dylan. "And one boy taught me that language doesn't start in textbooks. It starts in the hands, the heart, the desire to be understood." She continued, voice rising with emotion. "Thousands of brilliant children are still overlooked because adults assume silence means inability. It doesn't. It means we haven't learned to listen yet." She gestured to the building behind her. "This center exists so no child ever waits for years to be heard. And so no adult with potential is ever dismissed because of a uniform, an accent, or a missing degree." Then she invited Dylan to join her at the microphone. He signed slowly, confidently, proudly. "I had a voice. Dr. Morrison helped you hear it. Now we help others." The interpreter spoke his words. The crowd erupted. Tears streamed down Janelle's face, not because of recognition, but because of the truth in Dylan's message. This wasn't a story about a maid who became a doctor. It was a story about the millions of invisible people whose gifts go unseen until someone finally looks. It was a story about listening, about refusing to stay small, about unlocking voices, both spoken and unspoken. As the applause rolled over her, Elena wrapped an arm around her mother. Richard stood proudly beside Dylan. A community that once didn't exist was now united because one woman dared to believe she had more to offer than the world expected. The girl who learned sign language in the dark hours of exhaustion. The boy who once hid behind his hands. The billionaire father who almost gave up hope. All of them had transformed. And Janelle's final words captured the lesson that made the audience rise to its feet. Don't wait for the world to notice your brilliance. And don't let anyone else's brilliance go unnoticed. The scissors closed. The ribbon fell. A new future opened.